Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. Tonight we're taking a ride down the winding back roads of the Appalachian Mountains with 12 true road trip horror stories. Encounters that prove, sometimes, the scariest part of the journey isn't the destination, it's the road itself. Before we dive in, let me know. Where are you watching from? And what time is it for you? Now, let's step into the darkness together. Story number 1. I used to think the oddest thing that could happen to a person in my line of work was uncovering a misfiled document or stumbling on a forgotten collection. I'm a library historian. Specifically, I catalog and preserve archival materials at a small heritage library in downtown Toronto. It's meticulous work, quiet and precise, and I've always loved it for those very reasons. That's what made what happened to me in 2001 so difficult to reconcile. I didn't just uncover something strange, I uncovered something impossible. And even now, after everything, I still question my own memory of it. But I have to tell it, at least once, the way it really happened. It started with a box that should never have been there. We were clearing out storage to prepare for a digitization initiative. An endless project, really, with dozens of volunteers and interns sorting, scanning, and documenting everything from old newspapers to marriage licenses. One of the student workers flagged me down, holding up a gray archival box, unlabeled, sealed with a brittle strip of masking tape that had yellowed like old teeth. When I opened it, it smelled of dust and ink, just like everything else. Nothing remarkable. Inside, a single item. A leather-bound diary, worn and soft at the edges but intact. I flipped through it absent-mindedly at first. The handwriting caught my eye. It wasn't just familiar. It was mine. Not like mine. Mine. Same tight loops on the G's, the open-topped A's, the occasional slant on capital T's when I write quickly. I froze. At first I thought maybe I'd misplaced a personal journal and it somehow got mixed in with the archives. But that made no sense. I hadn't kept a handwritten diary in over a decade. And the ink wasn't modern. It had bled into the page in a way fountain pens do over time, and the paper had that texture you don't find in anything made after 1900. Then I saw the date. June 1871. I read the first entry. It described a woman named Annalisa, her dreams, her solitude, her walks along the Don River. I felt a strange twinge reading her words, like déjà vu. They were things I had thought myself, even said aloud recently, but seeing them there in ink made my skin crawl. I couldn't put it down. That night, I stayed in the library long after everyone else left, reading until my eyes blurred. Each entry drew me in further, Annalisa speaking of feelings of disconnection, a sense that she had lived another life, one she couldn't quite remember but that haunted her in dreams. By the fourth entry, I was visibly trembling. She wrote about working in a private records office, how the sound of paper soothed her, how she never quite felt seen in her body, even among friends. The wording, the cadence of her language. If I hadn't known better, I'd say I had written it last week. I didn't sleep that night. I went home and just stared at the ceiling until morning. My mind was racing too fast to rest. The dreams began the following night. At first, they weren't disturbing, just fragments. I'd see cobblestone streets, the inside of a drawing room with faded wallpaper, a dress slipping over unfamiliar shoulders. But by the third night, I was waking up sore. I chalked it up to sleeping in odd positions, until I found a bruise on my left arm that hadn't been there before. Deep purple, just above the elbow. It matched exactly with a passage I'd read the night before, where Annalisa described falling on the stairs at her boarding house. I tried to reason it out. Maybe I was internalizing the diary so intensely that my body was psychosomatically reacting. But that didn't explain the next injury. a thin slice across my palm, fresh and stinging when I woke up, as if from a knife. That night's entry had spoken of a kitchen accident. I stared at the cut in the mirror, watching a tiny bead of blood form at the edge, and I started to cry. Not from the pain, but from the sheer helplessness of it. I stopped bringing the diary home after that, locked it in a file cabinet at work. It didn't help. The dreams continued, becoming more vivid, more violent. I felt everything, rain on my shoulders, pain in my ribs, hunger. I watched men in stovepipe hats pass me on Queen Street. I smelled coal smoke and horses. One night, I dreamt of a man grabbing my wrist and shaking me. I woke with finger-shaped bruises. In waking life, I tried to function normally. I told no one. Who could I tell? That I'd found a diary over 100 years old in my own handwriting, and that it was somehow feeding me someone else's life, one wound at a time? I kept researching instead. I scoured local archives for any record of Annalisa. The diary gave no last name, no direct address, only clues. I matched her description of a records office with a municipal location that had operated in the late 1800s. I found one name, finally, in a long-defunct census ledger. Annalisa Meyer, female, 32, listed as a clerk. No next of kin. She had died in 1873, 2 years after the diary began. Cause of death? Unknown. Body never recovered. One morning, I awoke with blood in my mouth. I'd bitten my tongue in my sleep, hard enough to leave a gash. That was the day I called in sick for the first time in 6 years. I couldn't keep living like this. I took the diary to a university specialist I trusted, a rare manuscripts expert who'd worked with me before. I didn't tell him anything about the dreams, only asked for analysis. He confirmed that the materials were authentic. Late 19th century ink, binding, paper, everything checked out. He even commented on the handwriting. "You've got quite the historical twin," he joked. "Or a time machine." I tried to laugh. I couldn't. That night, I had the final dream. Annalisa was running, barefoot, sobbing, through wet alleyways. Someone had accused her of something, I couldn't tell what. She kept whispering, "I didn't mean to be seen, I didn't mean to exist." Her dress caught on a rusted gate, and she fell hard, hitting her head. I felt the shock of impact, the white-hot pain, and then nothing. When I woke up, I was on the floor beside my bed, nose bleeding, hands scraped raw. I decided then that the diary needed to leave me. Whatever was happening, I had to cut the connection. I wrote a letter to the Canadian National Archive and donated the volume anonymously. It was accepted without question. 2 weeks later, a receipt arrived in the mail. I haven't seen the diary since, and the dream stopped, just like that. My bruises faded, my energy returned. I began sleeping again, real deep sleep. I threw myself into work and told myself I'd imagined most of it. Stress, overwork, a fragile mind playing tricks. I almost believed it. Until 3 months later, when I was visiting a friend in Ottawa and decided, on impulse, to stop by the archives and see the display my diary had been added to. I didn't say who I was. I just wandered into the special collections room, where the public exhibits rotate seasonally. The display was simple. Glass case, climate-controlled. The diary was open to its final page. I stood frozen in front of it for at least 10 minutes before I could speak. The last page had changed. I had read it a dozen times before donating it. It had ended mid-sentence. "I do not know how to thank you for..." That was it. But now it read, "Thank you. I'm you now." The ink was fresh. My handwriting, every curve and slant and loop. I left without saying a word. My friend later asked why I seemed so quiet that day. I said I wasn't feeling well. It's been over 2 decades now. I haven't had a dream of Annalisa since. No more phantom injuries or old bruises. But sometimes, I'll be doing something ordinary. Pouring tea, folding laundry, and I'll feel her. Not as a memory or a ghost, but as a presence, looking out through my eyes. A soft weight inside me that wasn't always there. I've made peace with it, I suppose. Maybe she was always there. Maybe I was her once, or she's me now. I don't know. But the strangest part is, I don't feel alone anymore. And I'm not sure I ever was. Before we jump into the next story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. We really need your love and support. Story number 2. They say some voices were never meant to be heard. Late-night radio is a strange sort of intimacy. Strangers confessing to shadows, silence wrapped around sound waves, and a city half asleep while you speak into a void that sometimes speaks back. After more than 20 years at Radio Echo, I thought I'd heard everything. Drunk philosophers, lonely hearts, angry rants, unfiltered poetry. My show aired from midnight to 3 a.m., the last broadcast. And in those hours, people told the truth because they thought no one was really listening. It began quietly, a call on a Wednesday night. The voice was calm, flat, no static in the line. He said, "There will be a fire in Altona. An apartment on Bleicherstrasse. 2 bodies, 1 child. You should get there before the flames do." Most prank calls were messier, slurred, giggling, bizarre. This one felt like a news report, almost robotic, but not quite. I wrote it down, out of habit, and moved on. At 3:10 a.m., I packed up, walked down the corridor past the posters and aging walls, and went home. Next morning, the news said there'd been a fire on Bleicherstrasse. A man and woman were dead. Their daughter made it out with burns. I stared at the screen longer than I needed to, still in my kitchen, cereal going soggy. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe someone heard sirens and made a sick joke. The second call came 3 days later. Same voice. Jungfernstieg Station, 2:17 a.m. A man will push another onto the tracks. It'll look like an accident. Then silence. Nothing else. That night, something pulled at me. Not curiosity, a heavier feeling. Responsibility, maybe. I drove there after the show, heart pounding even though it felt stupid. Cold platform, a few late passengers, a guy near the edge, drunk. I watched from a distance, unsure what I was even doing. Then another man approached him, said something I couldn't hear. They exchanged a few words. The second man looked around, then shoved. Just like that. A screech. Someone screamed. The drunk man landed between the rails, hit his head. Blood. It all happened fast. The pusher vanished into the tunnel. Police questioned witnesses, including me. I told them what I saw, left out the call. What was I going to say? A voice on the radio warned me. That week, sleep got harder. I started bringing a tape recorder into the studio, archiving everything. If this caller kept showing up, I needed proof. And he did, every few nights, always calm, always correct. A mugging in St. Pauli. A woman strangled in her bathtub in Eimsbüttel. A body left in the river. I stopped thinking it was coincidence. I stopped pretending it wasn't real. But I still didn't tell anyone. Not the police. Not my producer, Marcus. I became obsessed. I tried tracing the number. Always blocked. We didn't have caller ID in the booth. The tech was ancient. So I started going. Every time I went. Sometimes I got there after it happened. Once, I arrived 5 minutes before and tried to stop it. Yelled, intervened. The man ran, left the knife. Victim lived. Police arrested me. Said I matched the description. I told them I was just trying to help. They didn't believe me. "How did you know?" they asked. I couldn't explain. That became the pattern. The calls came, I chased them, sometimes helped, sometimes not. But after the third arrest, things got worse. News started picking it up. Radio host linked to series of violent crimes. The station panicked. I was suspended. Temporarily, they said. But the voice kept calling. Even though I wasn't on air anymore, I stayed in the booth, alone, late at night. Told no one. Used a dummy recording to pretend I was still live. The lines were open, and he always found them. Then he changed. His voice, still calm, started to add strange details. Personal things. "You're not sleeping. You still keep your father's watch on the desk. You drink too much now. And then, you were supposed to die at Jungfernstieg." That broke something in me. I shut off the mic and sat in the dark for a long time. That was the night I realized he wasn't predicting. He was deciding. I tried everything. Changing numbers, different booths, borrowing phones. But he always found me. It was like he was inside the system. Or maybe he was the system. The more I tried to get away, the more detailed his messages became. One night, he said, "You're still trying to be the hero. That's not your role. You're just the messenger." Then, silence. That was the first night I cried in the booth. 44 years old, former war correspondent, and I sat there sobbing like a child because I knew I wasn't in control of any of it. When Marcus called me back in, said the board had agreed to let me return, I hesitated. He said ratings were up. People missed me. I could go live again. "We'll call it a comeback," he said. I should have said no, but I didn't. My first show back was tense. I kept staring at the blinking line, dread wrapped around every second. It didn't take long. 1:11 a.m. The light blinked. I picked up, didn't say anything. "Tonight, Jan," he said, "we complete the broadcast." He gave an address, a time. "Go alone. No police. If you follow the rules, I'll let you ask 3 questions before it ends." Then the line cut. I almost deleted the recording. I almost went to the police. But you have to understand, I needed to know. Why me? Who was he? What did he want? So I went. It was an abandoned radio tower, one we hadn't used since the 80s. A relic. Metal stairs groaned as I climbed. Inside, the floorboards were warped. Old equipment littered the room. Dusty mics, tangled wires. He was already there, or something that looked like him. Pale face, neat coat, calm eyes. "You brought the recorder," he said. "Good. This is your final show." He gestured toward the microphone. "Sit. We begin with your 3 questions." I was shaking, but I sat. "First question. Why me?" "You heard," he said simply. That was enough. "Second. Are you human?" A pause. He smiled gently. "I was." "Third. Why tell me these things?" His eyes lit up. "Because you told them, and they listened." Then he leaned in. "You will describe what happens next." Every detail. Don't leave anything out. Something inside me screamed to run, but my hands hit record. I started talking. At first, just the facts, the room, the equipment, his face. Then things began to change. The walls seemed to ripple. Sounds bled into the room. Screams, radio fuzz, static that sounded like voices. My chest burned. My heart pounded in unnatural rhythms. He watched me, nodding, as if conducting an orchestra only he could hear. I kept narrating, because every time I stopped, the pain got worse. My ribs felt like they were cracking. Blood ran from my nose. I described the pain, the fear. I said his name, though I didn't know it. "He calls himself Echo," I said. That felt true. Not sure how I knew it, and when I said it, he smiled. Then he said the last line. "And now, Jan, Tell them how you die. The pain exploded. I couldn't breathe. My body convulsed. But my voice kept working. I heard it, my own voice, detached, calm, describing it all. The seizing, the cold creeping into limbs, the final heartbeat. And then I did die. But the tape didn't stop. They found it weeks later, when Marcus finally came looking. My body was already decomposing. The tape was intact. The recording was perfect. Clear voice, 3 hours, a full show. They aired it, not officially, but someone leaked it. People said it was the most haunting broadcast in radio history. They said it didn't sound like a man dying. It sounded like a soul being dismantled. A month later, the station burned down. Fire inspectors never found the cause. They never aired another late-night show again. And no one's answered line 3 since. Story number 3. It started with something so small I almost didn't notice it. I was brushing my teeth late one night, maybe around 1:30, when I heard a faint, wavering noise coming from the living room. I paused, toothbrush halfway to my mouth, listening. The sound wasn't rhythmic, just a strange, whispery fuzz. I thought maybe the radio had turned on by itself again, something it had done once or twice after a storm knocked out the power the month before. I didn't think much of it then. The radio was an old Sony model my grandfather gave me years ago. I rarely used it, only for background noise while working on long projects. I walked over and sure enough, it was on. Nothing but static filled the room. I stared at it for a few seconds. The volume knob was turned all the way down, yet I could still hear it. That's what struck me as odd. I turned it off and went to bed. The next night it happened again. Same time, same sound. But this time I swear I heard something underneath the static. Like a scream. A single, muffled scream buried deep in the fuzz, so subtle I thought it was just my tired brain playing tricks. Still, I sat down in front of the radio, heart thudding faster than I wanted to admit. I listened for maybe 5 minutes, then shook my head and turned it off. I tried to forget about it. But then it happened the third night. The sound was more distinct. It wasn't a single scream, it was several. Quick, chopped, almost rhythmic. I grabbed my phone and recorded it. I listened to the recording, replayed it over and over. There was something there, I was sure of it now. The next day at work, I couldn't focus. My coworker Naoko noticed. She asked if I was sick or something. I told her it was nothing, but she kept pushing. Eventually, I told her what I'd heard. She gave me that look, the one people give when they're trying not to call you crazy. But she didn't laugh. She just said, "You should talk to Jin." Jin was a freelance sound engineer Naoko used to date. I didn't know him personally, but apparently he specialized in forensic audio. Restoration, enhancement, that sort of thing. I reached out to him that night, sent him the clip, and asked if he could take a look. He replied within an hour. "This isn't just static. There's something encoded here. It's layered. Give me a couple of days, I didn't sleep well after that." The radio stayed off, but every night at the same time, I felt like I was hearing it anyway. Phantom noise, maybe. My own mind filling the silence. I told myself that. 3 days later, Jin messaged again. He asked me to meet in person. We sat in a small coffee shop near Shinjuku Station. My stomach twisted the whole time. Jin looked pale, like he hadn't slept much either. "There's a voice," he said, tapping his laptop. Multiple, actually. But one stands out. I slowed it down and filtered the noise he played it for me. It was a woman's voice. Desperate, slurred, with exhaustion or fear, I couldn't tell. "Help me. Please, I'm underground. I'm in the dark. I don't know how long I stared at the screen, goosebumps crawling up my arms." Jin looked sick. Do you have any idea where this came from? He asked. I told him the radio just turned on by itself, that it wasn't tuned to any station. He didn't seem satisfied with that, but he didn't press further. I didn't know what to do. Was this real? Some elaborate prank? A transmission from an old police broadcast? But the voice sounded recent and terrified. I brought Naoko to my apartment the next day. I wanted her to hear it for herself. We played the raw clip, then Jin's filtered version. She turned pale. That voice, that sounds like Emmy. Who? Emmy Honda. She used to work in marketing back when I started. She disappeared 6 years ago, vanished after work one night. Her photo was all over the news for months. My mind reeled. 6 years? Could someone really be alive after all that time? Could this really be her? Naoko insisted we go to the police. I agreed. But when we played the clip for the officers, they gave us the same look Naoko had given me days before. It's an interesting audio clip, one officer said, but this could be fabricated. It's not proof of anything. We were dismissed, not rudely, but definitively. That night I couldn't sit still. I stared at the radio for hours. I opened it up, checking the wiring. I thought maybe someone had modified it. Maybe there was a receiver planted inside, picking up some hidden signal. But I didn't find anything. Just old circuits and a little dust. Then something shifted. Around 1:45, the static came back. I hadn't turned it on. I was standing in the kitchen when I heard it. Loud this time. Angry. I ran into the room, and it changed. The noise thinned out, became rhythmic, a pattern, like Morse code but more frantic. I hit record on my laptop, captured the whole thing. Once it stopped, I sent it to Jin right away. The next day, he called me. He sounded breathless. It's an address. What? Some kind of crude digital burst, encoded through amplitude changes. But it decodes to coordinates. An address in Tokyo. My pulse slammed into my neck. Jin sent the location. It was 3 blocks from my apartment. Naoko and I met there the next evening. A small, weathered building with 2 stories and a convenience store on the first floor. We checked the address again. The radio static had led us here. We wandered around the alley beside the building, unsure what we were looking for. That's when we found the basement door. Rusted. Unlocked. Everything in me screamed not to go inside. But we did. The stairs were steep, and the air turned damp halfway down. We used our phone flashlights. At the bottom there was a short hallway and a metal door. We knocked. Nothing. We pushed. It creaked open slowly. The smell hit us first. Not death, but rot. Mold. Old things that shouldn't be. The room beyond was small, lined with worn furniture, faded blankets, old radios, stacks of them, maybe a dozen, all off, all dead quiet, and in the center of the room, a cage, inside it, a woman. She looked up at the light, covered her eyes. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. We called emergency services. We wrapped her in Naoko's coat and tried to give her water. She was thin, pale, but alive. Her name was Emmy. She'd been missing for 6 years. She told the police about the man who had kept her there, a recluse from the building upstairs. He used to work in communications technology. He'd modified the radios himself, experimented with signal bursts, even embedded his own code into analog devices. He was dead now, had a heart attack weeks before. She had no idea. She thought he was still upstairs, feeding her, watching. The radios were all he left behind. And somehow, one of them found me. The news picked up the story within hours. Missing woman found alive in Tokyo basement. I was interviewed, thanked, even praised. They called me a hero. I didn't feel like one. I kept thinking about how easily I could have ignored that sound. Turned off the radio, gone to bed, lived my quiet life. But something had reached out through the noise. Something desperate and human and real. Jin helped catalog the equipment for the authorities. He said the radio that had received the signal from Emmy was unlike anything he'd seen. The modifications were advanced, erratic, impossible to replicate. It's still being studied. I never turned it back on. In fact, I got rid of every radio I owned. Sometimes I wonder if I'll hear that static again. If it'll come back in the middle of the night, whispering something new. I don't want to hear it. I can't. I helped save one person. That's enough. That has to be enough. Story number 4. It wasn't something we planned. Not really. Johan had been poking around on an old Icelandic message board, the kind full of forgotten places and strange rumors. That's where he found the story. An abandoned fishery outside Reykjavik, locked up since the early 50s after a group suicide. Supposedly 23 workers had sealed themselves inside and never came out. The official story was gas poisoning. But there were always whispers of something else. Something worse. I remember reading it over his shoulder in our apartment, half interested until I saw the part about the bodies never being recovered. The place had been sealed up tight for decades, and we decided, stupidly, I know now, that we'd see for ourselves. There were 3 of us, me, Johan, and Arnar. We'd all known each other for years since college. Elsa should have been the voice of reason, but instead she brought bolt cutters and snacks. She said if we were going to break into a building tied to a mass death, we should at least have sandwiches. She always had that dry sense of humor that made everything seem a little less serious. I wish she hadn't come. I wish I'd said no. The entrance was easier to crack than we expected. The rusted lock gave way with a snap, and Johan grinned like a kid sneaking into a movie. Inside, everything was stale and brittle. There was no sudden sense of dread, no heavy air or weird smells. It just looked like a forgotten warehouse, at first. Old machinery, pallets stacked with broken crates, ice-covered walls in the deeper rooms where the cold had somehow lingered. We stayed together, mostly out of nerves. None of us said it out loud, but we didn't want to be alone in there. We explored maybe half the building before Arnar found the locked freezer door. It was solid steel, with hinges bolted like something meant to hold something in, not keep people out. There were scratch marks on the outside, like someone had dragged a heavy chain across it a long time ago. That should have been enough. It really should have. Johan managed to get it open using a crowbar and a lot of sweat. The second the door creaked, something in my chest tightened. Not fear, not yet. Just this sense that we were stepping over a line we wouldn't come back from. The cold inside hit us like a wall, unnatural and dry. And there they were. The bodies. Dozens of them, arranged in neat rows on the floor, perfectly preserved in the frost. Not stacked, not tossed, arranged. Like someone had laid them down gently. Men and women in work uniforms from another era. Their eyes were open. Their skin was pale blue, stretched tight like wax. But they looked real. Too real. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until I felt dizzy. Arnar muttered, "This isn't right." And I could see his hands shaking. He's not someone who spooks easily. But then Johan pointed to one of the bodies, a woman in the front row. Her neck had fresh gouges in it. Not from rot. These were clean, ripped like claws, and her expression was different from the rest. Not peaceful, not frozen, terrified. That's when Elsa said, "Look at their fingernails." Some of them had broken nails, torn fingers. We followed her gaze to the wall behind the back row. Claw marks, dozens, deep and uneven. Frozen blood caked the grooves. No one spoke for a long time. Eventually, Johan whispered, They weren't dead when they were put in here. He looked at us, wide-eyed. Someone locked them in alive. I wanted to leave. Right then. I said as much. But Johann, still caught up in the shock, insisted we take pictures. People need to see this, he kept saying, pacing, his voice almost giddy with adrenaline. This is history. A crime scene, I told him it was a tomb. Arnar agreed. But Elsa just stood there, staring at one of the corpses like she was trying to place something. We argued. About what to do. About who we'd tell, if anyone. While we bickered, Elsa walked deeper into the freezer, between the bodies. She crouched near one, touching its face. I yelled at her to stop, but she didn't react. Then she stood up and turned to us with the strangest look, blank and unreadable. I think they did it to themselves, she said. They weren't killed. They submitted to something Arnar told her to get out of there, that we were leaving. Now. But Elsa didn't move. She just stared, like she was waiting for something. That's when we heard the noise. A dull scrape, like ice shifting or metal dragging, but it came from behind us, near the door. Johann spun around, dropping the camera. I grabbed Elsa's arm, trying to pull her back, but she resisted. The noise came again, this time closer, and then nothing. We ran, or tried to. The freezer door was halfway closed. Johann swore he'd left it open, but we didn't stop to argue. We pushed through and sprinted until we were outside, panting and shaking. Nobody said a word on the drive home. We should have told someone then. We should have called the police, the news, anybody. But we didn't. We were scared. Not just of what we saw, but of what it meant. If we said we'd found dozens of preserved corpses in a sealed freezer, with no decay, with claw marks and blood and God knows what else, we'd sound insane. We'd be arrested for trespassing at best. Elsa got quiet after that, withdrawn. She stopped answering calls, missed work, ignored messages. Arnar went to check on her a few days later and said her apartment felt like a cave. Dark, cold, untouched. She wouldn't open the door, said she was tired, said she needed to rest. 2 weeks later, she was dead. They said it was heart failure in her sleep. No signs of distress, no medical explanation. Just gone. Peaceful. Like she'd given up. At her funeral, I couldn't look at her face. Not because I was grieving, although I was, but because I was afraid I'd see that same frozen expression as the ones in the freezer. That empty, wide-eyed terror. Johann spiraled. He kept saying he felt like something had followed us, that he could hear scraping sometimes in his apartment, that he'd wake up with his sheets pulled halfway off and ice on the inside of the window. I thought he was losing it, until it started happening to me too. Arnar came over one night, pale and panicked. He said he found a long gouge mark on the wall above his bed, like a claw, but nothing else. No break-in, no footprints, just a single mark, deep and deliberate. We decided to leave. Johann and I flew out the next day. Arnar took a ferry the day after. We didn't tell anyone, didn't explain. Just disappeared. It's been almost a year since then. We don't talk much. Johann lives in Canada now, working under a different name. Arnar's somewhere in Germany, off the grid. I'm in a small town that nobody's heard of, using a passport that doesn't belong to the person I used to be. I still dream about it. The rows of bodies, the marks on the wall. But worse are the dreams of Elsa, standing there, staring at me, eyes open and empty. Like she knew what was coming and let it happen. Like she wasn't afraid at all. Sometimes I wonder what we really found in that freezer. If it was something ancient, waiting, or something those people called willingly. A pact, a surrender, a cycle. I don't know if it followed us, or if it just woke up and started again. But I do know this. It's not over. Not really. Because some nights I still hear that scraping. And I don't sleep anymore. Story number 5. I've never told anyone this before. Not really. A few bits here and there, once in therapy, once in a foster interview, but never the whole thing. I guess part of me thought no one would believe it, or maybe I didn't want to believe it myself, but I think I'm ready now. If you're hearing this, just listen to the end. That's all I ask. My name is Mila. I was 10 when everything happened. It started when I went to live with my grandmother in Vienna after my mom died. Dad wasn't in the picture. I never even met him. So social services placed me with Greta, my mother's estranged mother. I'd never even heard her voice before, let alone seen her, but she showed up at the funeral with all the paperwork done. Her expression was a mask of sorrow, perfectly practiced, like something she wore to formal events. I was numb, honestly. You could have put me in a box and mailed me anywhere, and I wouldn't have cared. So I went with her. Greta lived alone in a creaky 3-story house just outside the city center. The place had this heavy, quiet feel, like time didn't move the same way inside. But what struck me most was the dolls, shelves and shelves of them. Old-fashioned, porcelain-faced dolls, each dressed in elaborate handmade clothes. They sat on mantels, windowsills, in glass cabinets. Some were big, child-sized even, others fit in the palm of your hand. They all looked so real. Not lifelike in a cheap toy way. I mean, uncannily real. Their eyes didn't just reflect light. They seemed to hold it. Greta said she made them herself. I was both impressed and unsettled, which I guess is how a lot of people felt about her. She didn't smile often, but when she did, it made you want to run and hide. It never reached her eyes. She'd tilt her head and say things like, "They're my little treasures," or "Each one has its own soul." I thought she was just eccentric. Strange, sure, but not dangerous. The first time I noticed something truly off was when we were walking home from the market. A missing child poster caught my eye. A little girl named Elise, 8 years old, gone for 2 weeks. I didn't think much of it until a few days later, when I saw one of Greta's new dolls on the sideboard in the hallway. The resemblance to Elise was terrifying. The same blue eyes, the same tiny mole by her lip. I froze. I must have stared for a full minute before Greta's voice cut through behind me. "Do you like her?" "She's new. Just finished her last night. I couldn't speak. I just nodded." After that, I started paying attention, watching the news, scouring the local papers, noting every face on every poster. The pattern was subtle, but it was there. Kids would vanish. Boys, girls, always under 12. Within days, sometimes hours, a new doll would appear in Greta's collection. The resemblance was never perfect, but always unmistakable. The tilt of a nose. A distinctive gap between teeth. Scar, even. And always, always the same vacant, staring eyes. At first, I told myself it was coincidence, or maybe Greta was using the posters for inspiration. Still deeply creepy, but not criminal. But the more I watched her, the more I noticed other things. The basement door that was always locked, even though she claimed she used it for sewing. The odd chemical smell that would waft up through the vents at night. The way she always had flour on her hands, even when she hadn't been baking. One night, I crept downstairs after midnight. I knew she was asleep. She took strong sleeping pills that knocked her out cold. I picked the lock with a bobby pin, my hands shaking so hard I could barely keep hold of it. The basement was worse than I imagined. Not a cozy crafting room, no sewing machine, no shelves of fabric, just a long workbench under a single dangling bulb and rows of tools, knives, scalpels, jars of strange liquids. And next to them, bundles of cloth, tightly sewn, shaped like small bodies. I threw up. I don't even remember climbing the stairs again. Everything after that was a blur. I wanted to run, to call someone, anyone, but she'd cut the landline weeks earlier to save money. And I didn't have a phone. I was just a 10-year-old kid stuck in a house with a woman I was beginning to believe might actually be a murderer. The next morning, she acted like nothing happened. Made me porridge with cinnamon, like always. Smiled that cold, slow smile. I wondered if she knew I'd been in the basement. I kept waiting for her to say something, punish me, but she didn't. That somehow made it worse. I began keeping notes, dates of disappearances, doll arrivals, any weird things I heard or saw. I hid the notebook under a loose floorboard in my room. I couldn't prove anything yet, but I was determined. I started pretending to be sick so I wouldn't have to go out with her. I knew she didn't like outsiders much. She only went into town when she had to. No friends, no visitors, no neighbors dropping by. It was 2 weeks later when the break finally came. A man named Lucas showed up, said he was from the police, investigating missing children. He asked to speak with Greta, and she invited him in, reluctantly. I watched from the staircase as he questioned her politely, then turned to me with a kind smile and asked if I was doing okay. I lied, of course, said everything was fine. Greta stood beside me like a statue, hand lightly resting on my shoulder. Her fingers dug in just enough for me to get the message. But Lucas didn't seem convinced. He gave me his card before he left. I tucked it into my notebook under the floorboard. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about the basement, about Lucas, about what would happen if she found my notebook. I had to act. The next day, while Greta was in the garden, I slipped into her sewing room, the real one, upstairs, and found a burner phone in a drawer. I don't know why she had it. Maybe it was her only way to contact people. Maybe she thought no one would look there. I called Lucas and told him everything. I read him parts of my notebook, told him about the dolls, the basement, the smell. He told me to stay calm, and that he'd be there that evening with a warrant. I hung up and felt my hands start to sweat. I should have felt relief, but all I felt was fear. Because Greta had walked in. She stood in the doorway, eyes locked on the phone in my hand. No expression on her face, just silence. Then she said, "Put it down, Mila." I tried to run, but she grabbed me. She was stronger than I imagined, bony fingers like steel. I kicked and screamed, but she dragged me down the hall toward the stairs. I thought she was taking me to the basement, and I started to panic so hard I could barely breathe. But instead, she shoved me into the attic and locked the door behind me. It was hot and cramped and smelled like mothballs and dust. I heard her moving things downstairs, maybe trying to hide evidence. I cried until I passed out. Hours later, I woke to voices, male voices, then loud footsteps, then silence again. When the attic door finally creaked open, it was Lucas. They found everything. The workshop, the remains in the stuffing, dozens of DNA matches to missing children. Greta was arrested that night. She didn't resist. When they led her away, she looked at me once and said, "I kept them safe." I was placed in protective custody immediately. The press went wild. The doll maker of Vienna. They talked about it for months. Forensic psychologists said Greta had some delusional disorder, that she believed she was preserving children's innocence by turning them into eternal dolls. That the process, as horrific as it was, had a ritualistic logic to her. That she thought she was saving them from the horrors of growing up. I don't care about any of that. What matters is, she killed them. She took children, and she killed them. And she nearly made me one of them. I was adopted by a couple in Denmark a year later. They were kind. They didn't push me to talk. I burned the notebook myself one afternoon in their backyard. Just watched the pages curl and blacken and disappear. I still can't be in the same room as a porcelain doll. Even now, just seeing one in a shop window makes my chest tighten. Sometimes I dream about the basement. I smell that awful mixture of lavender and bleach. I hear the soft clink of tools on a tray. I hear her humming. But I'm safe. Which story setting scared you the most? Let me know in the comments. Story number 6. When I first moved into that apartment in Munich, I didn't think much of the silence. After years of city noise, silence felt like a blessing. The listing had been cheap, suspiciously cheap, but I chalked it up to luck. I needed a new start, a place where no one knew me, no one stared, and no one asked questions I didn't want to answer. I'd just come out and transitioned the year before. Berlin had become too loud, too full of memories and people I couldn't be around anymore. So when I signed the lease and missed her, Clemens handed me the keys with a handshake that felt a little too firm. I told myself I was finally getting my peace. It started about a week in. A noise. Faint at first, almost dismissible, like a pipe groaning or some old metal settling. I didn't even really notice it until one night I woke up. No reason, just awake, and realized I could hear something. Off. I lay there in the dark, holding my breath. It was a kind of moaning sound, barely audible, like someone far away calling for help. But the walls were thick, and my apartment was wedged between two vacant units. I knew because I'd asked. Mr. Clemens had said the tenants on either side had moved out at the same time, family emergency or something like that. Just temporary, he told me, though the rooms looked like they'd been untouched for months. Still, I told myself it was just my mind playing games. I'd been under stress, adjusting to new routines, trying to feel comfortable in my body and in this strange, echoey space. But the sounds didn't stop. They changed, became clearer. At times it was screaming, short, choked, panicked. Sometimes it was crying. Sometimes it was a voice. Words I couldn't quite make out, but female, desperate. The worst was the night I heard someone whisper "Bitte" right behind the wall by my bed. Please, I felt it more than heard it. I sat up so fast my neck cracked. I tried everything, earplugs, white noise, sleeping in the living room. Nothing helped. It wasn't just noise. It felt like something was pressing in around me, like the apartment itself didn't want me there. I'd get sudden chills down my spine, and my own voice started sounding different in the room, like the acoustics were warping or reflecting things back at me wrong. There were moments I couldn't trust my senses. I'd turn off the kitchen light, walk away, and come back to it flickering or on again. I even stopped unpacking fully. My clothes stayed half-folded in open boxes. A part of me was already thinking about leaving, even though I couldn't afford to. I finally told someone, Ruth, a local activist I'd met at a queer mutual aid event. She was kind, older, the kind of person who looked you directly in the eye and saw things you didn't know you were showing. I didn't plan to bring it up. I just meant to vent about loneliness, the usual isolation that came with being trans in a new city. But when she asked how the apartment was, I cracked. I told her everything. She went quiet for a moment, then asked for my address. The next day, she showed up with a folder under her arm. She'd done some digging. I had no idea how fast she worked, but she had papers from the Munich archives and newspaper clippings from decades ago. She laid them out on my coffee table with a calm that felt unnatural. The building had a history, one that no one talked about anymore. During the Cold War, it had been owned by a government front. Not West German, not East, something murkier. It was used as a way station. People who tried to defect from East Germany were brought there under the pretense of safety, then interrogated, held for days or weeks. Some disappeared. There were accusations, but no investigations, just rumors. I asked her what that had to do with the noises. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked over to one of the walls where I'd heard the voice the most. She pressed her ear to it, closed her eyes. When she pulled away, she looked shaken. "There's something inside," she said. We contacted the landlord. Mr. Clemens was strangely defensive, claimed ignorance, and when Ruth showed him the documents, he brushed it off. "Old rumors," he said. "No proof of anything. That building's been through multiple owners. I've kept it in perfect shape, but I pressed. Hard. I threatened to go public, and that got his attention." A week later, we had permission to bring in a private contractor, someone Ruth trusted, to scan the walls. They used infrared and found rooms, hidden ones, not small crawl spaces or structural gaps, but actual sealed chambers within the walls, soundproofed. No way to get in without breaking through. They opened one, just one. Inside, the air was stale. The walls were padded, the kind you'd find in a psychiatric ward. There was an old chair bolted to the floor, restraints still attached, a bucket, scratches on the door, and bones. Human remains, curled up in the corner. We called the police. Forensics confirmed it. The skeleton belonged to a woman in her 20s, dead for over 40 years. After that, everything happened fast. Investigators came in. Media got wind. Multiple rooms were found, each with remains. The building had been hiding a graveyard. It became a national scandal. Questions thrown at the government. Old Cold War files unsealed. Mr. Clemens tried to claim he never knew, but it didn't hold up. Turns out the building had been sold cheap because of its history. He'd taken advantage. Probably thought no one would find out. They evacuated all tenants, demolished the building. I watched from across the street as the walls came down. No ceremony. Just concrete breaking apart under machinery. Dust rising into the sky. I was given damages, enough to move somewhere better. I used some of it to start a trauma support group. Not just for what I'd been through, but for others like me. People who carry the weight of things others want to ignore. We meet weekly. Some of them know the full story. Some just know I've been through things. That's enough. Sometimes, though, in the quiet of my new place, I still lie awake and wonder how long those voices had been echoing in those walls. Years? Decades? How many tenants before me heard them and said nothing? Or left and forgot? Or didn't make it out at all? And I think about her, the one who whispered, "Bitte." I don't know her name. No one could identify her. But I hear her sometimes, not in my walls now, but in the quiet. I hear her, and I remember. And I answer every time, "I hear you." I won't forget. Story number 7. It was the autumn of 1983 when I went to France as part of a student exchange program. I was 16, wide-eyed, and full of that naive confidence only teenagers can carry. My host family lived on the outskirts of Nantes, but I was placed in a boarding school right in the heart of the city. The school had a stiff, gray exterior and long corridors that echoed your footsteps a beat too late. It felt like history had stained every stone. The students were decent enough, but I always felt like an outsider. My French was passable, but not fluent, and my accent made me self-conscious. I stuck mostly to myself. I'd spend evenings reading or writing postcards home. The dormitory building was old, supposedly built on top of a convent that had been shut down during the Revolution. That was a favorite rumor among the boys. They'd talk about how nuns were buried beneath the school, or how ghosts wandered the halls at night. Typical teen nonsense, I thought. About 3 weeks in, I started hearing something strange in my history class. It was during those last periods of the day when everything starts to blur. At first, I thought it was just voices from the hallway or some kind of echo. But it wasn't. These weren't complete words, more like soft muttering, as though someone was talking just behind the wall. It happened near the back corner of the classroom, by the window. I asked the student sitting beside me if he heard it too, but he just gave me a blank look. It kept happening, every day during that class, always in the same spot. The teacher, Madame Allard, never seemed to notice. I started leaning toward the wall, trying to make out the words. It sounded like a child, no, maybe a teenager, speaking very quickly, sometimes repeating things. But the voice was too faint to understand. I didn't tell anyone else at first. I was already feeling out of place. The last thing I needed was to be branded the crazy foreigner. But then one evening, I stayed late to finish a detention assignment in that same classroom. It was almost dark, and the janitor was locking up when I realized I'd left my notebook behind. I ran back, pushed the door open, and froze. The room was dim, only lit by a dying orange glow from the outside street lamp. I was alone, but the voice was louder, clearer. It wasn't muttering anymore, it was repeating my name 3 times. Thomas. 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 I backed out of the room, heart slamming in my chest, and didn't go back in. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't tell anyone. The next day, I tried to dismiss it as stress. I avoided the corner seat and kept my focus on the board. But I could still hear it, faintly, behind the wall. I began to dread history class. The voice became part of my daily routine, like an unwanted companion. I wasn't sure if I was losing my mind or if something really was happening behind that wall. A week later, I finally told someone. There was another exchange student, Luca, from Italy. We weren't close, but we talked occasionally. One afternoon, I mentioned the voice to him in the courtyard while we shared a cigarette behind the gym. He stared at me quietly, then said, "It's happened before." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "There was a German boy last year, Julian. He said the same thing. Voice in the walls, same classroom. Everyone thought he made it up for attention. Then, one day he was gone." Gone? His parents were told he went back home. But I remember that day. His suitcase was still in the dorm. He didn't pack. That night, I couldn't sit still. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, every creak of the old building making me flinch. Around midnight, I decided I needed to know. I needed to hear it again, alone. I crept out of bed, pulled on a sweatshirt, and tiptoed to the classroom. It wasn't locked. I stepped inside and stood by the same corner. Silence at first, just my breath and the soft hum of the city outside. Then, slowly, the whisper began. Only it wasn't just my name now. It was a mixture of words, some French, some not. One phrase repeated over and over, "Ils m'ont enfermé." They locked me in. I backed away from the wall, suddenly lightheaded. The air felt thick. The voice sounded desperate, trapped, as if it had been trying to reach someone for a long time. Then I heard scratching. Scraping like fingernails clawing at stone. My heart stopped. I bolted. The next morning, the school held an assembly. One of the teachers announced that a wall in the library annex had collapsed overnight due to structural issues. No one was hurt. But I noticed something odd. Some of the faculty seemed tense, almost shaken. Later that day, I walked by the area. The annex was sealed off with caution tape, but through the gaps, I could see bricks scattered across the floor, and something else. Notebooks, dozens of them, coated in dust and cobwebs, scattered among the rubble. I leaned in closer. One was open, pages flapping in the breeze. I squinted at the handwriting. It wasn't French. It wasn't even recent. The ink had bled into the paper with age. But then I saw a name scribbled at the top. Julian Weber, the German boy. I tried to go back that night to see more, maybe even take one. But the area was guarded. A security company hired by the school was posted for safety reasons. After that day, they began construction over the collapsed wall. They built something new over it, some kind of modern extension to the building. Everything was sealed. And the voices stopped. I never heard them again. History class returned to normal. The wall looked just like the others. But I couldn't unhear it, couldn't forget those words. Ils m'ont enfermé. I left Nantes 2 months later when the exchange program ended. I didn't talk about what happened, not even to my parents. What could I say? That I heard voices, saw old notebooks, and believe a student may have been bricked inside a wall? For years, I doubted myself. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I was just a lonely teenager in a foreign country, craving mystery. But last year, on a business trip to France, I passed through Nantes again. Curiosity pulled me back to the school. It had changed. New windows, new paint, a security gate. I didn't go inside, just stood across the street, staring. As I turned to leave, a boy about 16 walked past me toward the entrance. He stopped, looked at me strangely, and said in broken English, "Hey, you used to study here?" I nodded. "Did you ever hear it? The wall?" My skin turned cold. I asked what he meant. He shrugged, awkward, almost embarrassed. "Nothing, never mind. Just stupid stories." I didn't push. I just walked away. But I knew. It's still there. Beneath the concrete, behind the new plaster. That voice, whoever it was, is still trying to be heard, still repeating those same words. They locked me in. Story number 8. It was the winter of 2001 when I first took the babysitting job in Stellenbosch. I was 16, newly trusted by my parents to stay out past 10 p.m., and eager to make some extra money. The family lived just off Dorp Street, in a beautiful old house that looked like it belonged in a glossy lifestyle magazine, the kind of place with paintings in gilded frames and staircases that creaked in a romantic way, not a spooky one. Or so I thought. The mother, Elise, was friendly in that polished, slightly distracted way that rich women often are. The father didn't say much, just nodded at me as he adjusted his cufflinks. Their baby, Lily, was maybe 10 months old, rosy-cheeked and quiet, at least during the day. Elise gave me a short tour, showing me where Lily's room was, how to work the baby monitor, and what snacks I could help myself to. I remember she even laughed, saying, "It's an old house, lots of little sounds at night." "Don't let it spook you," I laughed along with her. I had no reason to feel uneasy at the time. The first 2 hours were uneventful. Lily was already asleep when they left around 7:30, and I had homework to finish. I sat at the kitchen table going over my history notes while nibbling on cheese crackers. Around 9 p.m., I heard a thump upstairs. Light, like something had fallen. I paused, heart jumping, but then I remembered Elise's words. Old house. Little sounds. I went back to studying. Another thump came 10 minutes later, slightly louder this time. I stood, walked halfway up the stairs, and called out, "Hello?" Nothing. The baby monitor was quiet, no crying. I told myself it was probably the wooden beams adjusting. My father used to say that about our roof when it made noises. Still, I turned the corner into the hallway and peeked into Lily's room. She was sound asleep, her tiny hand curled near her cheek. Back downstairs, I settled on the couch and turned on the TV, low volume, trying to shake off the unease. That's when the footsteps started. They weren't heavy. They were soft, almost hesitant, like someone walking barefoot on carpet. At first I thought maybe the parents had returned early, and I'd missed them coming in. But then I realized the steps were directly above the living room, in the attic. I muted the TV. There it was again. A shuffle. A slow, deliberate step. My chest tightened, and I reached for my phone. I didn't want to sound paranoid, so I texted Elise, "Hey, just checking in. Everything's fine. I think I heard some sounds upstairs. Just wanted to make sure it's normal." I waited. No reply. I sat frozen for maybe 5 full minutes, eyes glued to the ceiling, trying to convince myself it was a rat or some harmless animal. But the steps were too deliberate, too slow. Then I heard something I will never forget. A short, sharp sound like a camera shutter. Click. I stood up, heart pounding. The attic, from what Elise showed me, was accessed through a narrow pull-down ladder in the hallway. I had no intention of going up there. I texted again. "Sorry to bug, but I heard something in the attic. Could you call me?" Still no answer. I grabbed the landline phone from the kitchen and dialed the police. My voice trembled, but I tried to stay calm. "I think someone's in the attic," I said. "I'm babysitting and I hear footsteps up there." The operator was calm, asked for the address, and assured me someone would be dispatched. I was told not to confront anyone. I hung up and went to sit near the front door, holding Lily's baby bag in case I needed to grab her and run. Then the footsteps stopped. Completely. And that somehow made everything worse. I heard no door creak, no ladder drop. Just a long, awful silence. 10 minutes passed. 15. I considered going upstairs for Lily, but what if whoever it was came down then? What if they were waiting? Finally, flashing lights spilled through the windows. The police arrived, and I opened the door with shaking hands. 2 officers entered, asked me to step outside while they checked the house. I insisted they check on Lily first. They nodded and moved quickly up the stairs. I stood in the cold, my arms wrapped around myself. I could hear the officers' voices inside, then footsteps above. The attic. They were up there a long time. When they finally came back down, one of them looked pale. They found him. A man. He'd been living in the attic. Not a squatter, not someone who had broken in that night. Someone who had been there for days, maybe weeks. He had a sleeping bag, empty food wrappers, and a small pile of baby toys. He had also installed a peephole looking down into Lily's room. The worst part? They found photos. Printed ones, not digital. Photos of me, at different houses, from behind curtains, through windows, in school uniform, walking home, sitting on friends' porches. There were even pictures from another family I babysat for, one I hadn't mentioned to anyone. He must have followed me, tracked me. I didn't know him, had never seen his face. He was arrested right there. Later I found out he was mentally unstable, a drifter who had somehow gotten keys copied from one of the houses I used to work at. The police believed he had been living unnoticed in several homes I had babysat in, moving attic to attic, watching, waiting. Not for the children, for me. He hadn't hurt anyone, yet. But the psychologist who assessed him said he had escalation fantasies, written in a notebook found with his things. That he planned to introduce himself soon. Elise and her husband were horrified, apologetic. They had no idea. They'd noticed missing food, heard noises, but chalked it up to the house being old. After the arrest, they changed all the locks and moved temporarily. As for me, I stopped babysitting. Completely. For months, I didn't sleep properly. I kept thinking about the footsteps, above me, the camera click, the peephole. I wondered how many nights he'd watched me. I kept imagining him lying silently just a few feet above, eyes open, waiting for the moment I let my guard down. I had to go through therapy to deal with the anxiety and the panic attacks. Eventually, I got better. I learned to breathe through the flashbacks, to trust my instincts, to speak up when something doesn't feel right. I never saw him again. He was institutionalized, not sent to prison. I don't know where he is now, and I don't care to. People often think horror is ghosts or demons or things under the bed. But the real horror is that a man can live in your house, watch your baby, watch you, and you'd never even know. The real horror is the silence, the almosts, the things that nearly happened, and the attic door you never think to check. Story number 9. I was 23 when I moved to Krakow. I had just graduated with a degree in restoration arts, and my mentor had lined up a 6-month assistant position with a private collector who dealt in antique toys. It sounded unusual, but it was a paying job, and it came with an attic apartment in Podgorze above the workshop. I remember thinking it was quirky, and even a little charming, until it wasn't. The man I was working for was named Józef Wojcik. He had been a master doll maker in the 70s and 80s. After retiring, he continued repairing vintage dolls for clients across Europe. By the time I arrived, he was no longer taking new clients. He was old, frail, and barely left the shop anymore. My job, he explained during our first meeting, was simple: clean the dolls, catalog them, and maintain his records. Józef was polite but distant. His hands trembled constantly, yet he had this strange calm when handling the dolls. They were stored everywhere: shelves, drawers, even lined up along the floor in some rooms. Most of them were antique porcelain or composite dolls, some with cracked faces or faded glass eyes. But a few looked too real. Their skin had this almost translucent texture, the kind of thing you wouldn't notice unless you were up close. I once asked him about those, about the dolls that didn't quite look like the others. "They're my masterpieces," he said without smiling. "Unique commissions." No one else has ever made dolls like these. I tried to keep my unease to myself. It wasn't just the look of them, it was the way they were positioned. Some sat as if caught mid-conversation. One was tucked into a miniature bed with a blanket over its chin. Another was propped up in a child's wooden chair facing the window. The kind of thing that wouldn't have bothered me if I didn't always feel watched. He died 3 weeks later. It was sudden. One morning I brought up his tea like always, and found him slumped in the chair at his workbench. His eyes were open, just staring, no drama, no struggle. It was peaceful, almost like he'd simply fallen asleep. The coroner confirmed natural causes. Cardiac arrest. He was 82. Since I was listed as his assistant and emergency contact, the authorities had me inventory his workshop until the estate executor arrived. They told me to continue living there until things were sorted, and I didn't object. I was still being paid for the final month of my contract, and I needed the time to figure out my next move. The first odd thing happened when I began packing the dolls. There was a girl doll, black hair, pale eyes, dressed in a faded red smock, that I could have sworn I hadn't seen before. I would have remembered her. Her face was wrong, too symmetrical. The mouth slightly parted as if about to speak. The skin didn't have the usual gloss or brittleness of porcelain. It looked soft, almost moist. When I reached out to touch her, I hesitated. For a second, I'm not exaggerating, it looked like she blinked, I laughed it off, backed away, and told myself I was stressed. Lack of sleep, too much coffee, too many hours surrounded by lifeless faces. But I didn't touch that doll again. A few nights later, I woke to a noise from downstairs. Not a bang or a crash, just a creak. A slow, deliberate creak, like someone shifting weight on old floorboards. I sat up in bed, heart thudding, straining to hear more. Nothing. No footsteps, no voices, just silence. Still, I couldn't sleep. I went down with a flashlight. Everything looked as I'd left it. The shop was quiet. The workbench was undisturbed. But one of the cabinets, one I knew I had locked, was open. Slightly. A fine trail of dust from its edge was broken, like it had just been moved. Inside was the black-haired doll. I felt cold, not scared, just cold, like a slow frost creeping through my chest. I picked up the doll. Its dress was stiffer than I remembered. I turned it over and noticed something stitched into the hem in tiny thread. KZ 1984. KZ, I didn't know what that meant. But the year caught my attention. 1984 was listed in one of Joseph's ledgers. I flipped through the notebook later and found an entry under that year. Zofia, age 7. Final measurements confirmed. Skin arrived intact. Teeth in good condition. That was when I realized I was dealing with something deeply wrong. I stayed up all night reading through his journals. There were over a dozen similar entries, always with a name, an age, and chilling annotations. Nails clipped, iris preserved, cheeks lost elasticity post-mortem. These weren't notes about dolls. They were about children. The next morning I went to the police. They took me seriously at first. I showed them the journals, the stitching in the dress, the disturbing level of realism in some of the dolls. A junior inspector even accompanied me back to the shop. He took photos, handled a few items, made some calls. But by the afternoon, he said they'd found no record of the children mentioned in the journals ever being reported missing. Without a clear crime, he said, there wasn't much they could do. The official conclusion was that Joseph had a macabre artistic imagination. I knew better. I could feel it in my gut. Something terrible had happened in that shop. I decided to take matters into my own hands. Over the next few days, I examined each of those hyper-realistic dolls closely. 12 in total, all roughly the size of a small child. I carefully removed a glove from one. There were faint, faded fingerprints embedded into the skin. Another had what looked like actual eyelashes, too thick and coarse to be synthetic. Then I made a discovery I'll never forget. I noticed that some of the dolls had slight seams around their necks and backs. Fine, almost surgical. Using a scalpel, I opened one. Inside, instead of stuffing or wire, there was a thin layer of dried tissue. Human tissue. The smell hit me like rot and copper. I retched, nearly blacked out. I'd sliced into what was essentially a preserved corpse, stretched into a doll form. That night I called the police again. This time they came back with forensic experts. The investigation exploded. For weeks the shop was closed off. Every doll was analyzed, every journal scanned. It turned out that Joseph had been acquiring corpses, children, somehow. The sources were never fully traced. Black market, corrupt morgues, even orphanages. The full truth never came out. But what they confirmed was that he had been using real human skin, teeth, and sometimes eyes to create these masterpieces. The stitching I saw on that doll. KZ turned out to be the initials of Katarzyna Zielinska, a girl who went missing in Krakow in 1984. Her case had gone cold. She was 7 years old. DNA from her family matched the remains in the doll I'd examined. I moved out 2 days later. I couldn't bear to stay another night. I still get calls from journalists sometimes, people who want to make a documentary or write a book. I turn them all down. I've already lived the horror. I don't need to relive it for an audience. But sometimes, even now when I wake up at 3 a.m., I hear it again. That faint creaking from downstairs. Just once. Then silence. My therapist says it's PTSD, but I'm not so sure, because the last time it happened, I went down with a knife in hand, paranoid and shaking. And there, sitting on my couch where I never left it, was a doll I didn't recognize, wearing a red smock, with black hair and pale eyes. Story number 10. I still remember everything, not in the way memories usually blur with time, but with the painful sharpness of something I wish I could forget. This happened in 2022, and I haven't spoken about it publicly until now. Maybe I was scared people wouldn't believe me. Maybe I wasn't ready to say it out loud. But I owe it to her. Her name was Elias. She was a transgender rights activist here in Tallinn, and more than that, she was my friend. We met during a volunteer campaign in 2020. She had this quiet confidence, like someone who had already lived through 5 lifetimes of pain, but chose to keep walking anyway. She worked part-time in the local historical archives, this weird maze of underground storage beneath one of the older buildings downtown. The place was dense with forgotten documents, crumbling shelves, and no Wi-Fi past the second floor. She loved it. She called it her quiet rebellion, said it was the only place in the city that hadn't been fully sanitized and modernized yet. On March 18th, 2022, she messaged me, "Need a favor. Can you meet me at the archives around 6:30? Weird file came in today. Old, unregistered. Think you'll want to see it?" I asked what it was about, but she only replied, "Better to show than to explain." That night, I got there a few minutes early. The building was already closed to the public, but Lias had keys. She always wore them around her neck like a necklace. I pressed the buzzer twice, our signal, and waited. After a minute, she opened the door from the inside and gave me a tired smile. Her eyes were darker than usual, like she hadn't slept. "I think someone buried something down here," she said as we walked toward the elevator. The archives were 6 levels underground. Not all of them were officially mapped. I'd been to the second level once to help her sort something, and even that had made me feel claustrophobic. The air turned stale the deeper you went. The elevator was old, the kind with a clattering gate instead of real doors. She pressed the button for level 6. I asked if that level was even safe. She didn't answer, just stared straight ahead until the elevator shuddered into motion. The lights flickered as we descended. But that wasn't unusual. She told me they'd had issues with the wiring for years. When we stopped, she slid the gate open, and I hesitated. The hallway was completely dark. She pulled a small flashlight from her bag and handed it to me. "I've only been down here once before. It's mostly sealed off, but I found a side corridor that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades." We walked slowly, the beam of light bouncing against walls covered in grime and dust. There were no proper labels, just handwritten notes taped to boxes. After a few turns, we reached a door that didn't match the rest. Steel, no handle, just a small, broken keypad. "This is it," she whispered. "It opened when I came down earlier, was already unlocked. I think someone accessed it recently." I didn't know what I was expecting. Maybe another archive room or old microfilm. But the door creaked open to reveal a tiny chamber, no bigger than a walk-in closet. Inside was a desk, a single chair, and a stack of old notebooks, leather-bound, brittle. Lise reached for one and held it up to the flashlight. The language is Estonian, but from the late 1800s. This one talks about early conversion therapy, medical experiments on undesirables. Look at this. She showed me a drawing on one of the pages. It was crude, done in pencil, but clearly depicted someone with both masculine and feminine features, bound to a chair with what looked like surgical equipment around them. My stomach turned. Who the hell made this? She shook her head. There's no author. But I checked the registry. This section doesn't officially exist. No floor 6. Only 5 levels according to the blueprint. Then where the hell are we? I don't know. That's when we heard it. A metallic clang, like something being dropped behind us. We both froze. Did you close the elevator gate? She asked. I couldn't remember. I thought I had. We rushed back to the hallway, but it was already too late. The elevator was gone. I pulled out my phone. No signal. Hers had a flashlight app, and we used both phones to light the way as we tried to retrace our steps. That's when things got weird. The hallway wasn't the same. We turned left where we should have turned right, past corridors we hadn't seen on the way in. The air felt thicker, and the silence. It wasn't empty. It felt like someone holding their breath in the dark. She tried the emergency call panel on the wall. Nothing. I started banging on the walls, yelling for help. She tried to calm me down. We're not lost, she said. This place is just not mapped properly. But I saw it in her face. She was scared too. After about 20 minutes of walking, we found the elevator again. The gate was closed and the lights were out. It wasn't moving. I pressed the call button. Nothing. I kicked it. Nothing. She started pacing. There has to be a staircase, she said. They wouldn't build 6 floors underground without one. She was right. There was a fire escape sign pointing around a corner. We followed it, but the door was sealed shut with what looked like welded iron bars. No sign of recent work. It looked like it had been that way for decades. She was breathing heavier now, panic catching up. What if we didn't come down 6 floors? She whispered. What if we went somewhere else? I snapped. Don't say that. Don't start thinking like that. She didn't answer. I told her to sit while I walked ahead. I turned 2 corners and found nothing. Just more shelves, boxes, and a room with a broken pipe dripping water. When I got back, she was gone. Gone. I ran in every direction, yelling her name. Nothing. I left her phone with her, and mine was already at 3%. I kept walking, every step feeling like it was taking me further away from anything familiar. At one point, I swore I heard her humming, a tune she used to sing under her breath when she was nervous. But it led me to a dead end. Eventually, my phone died, and I sat. I just sat there in the dark, for I don't know how long. At some point, I must have passed out, because I woke up to voices. Real voices, male, female, official sounding. Flashlights. I started screaming. Security found me around 3:40 a.m. They'd been called because someone had accessed the basement without authorization and hadn't checked out. The elevator had been out of service since 9 p.m., according to them. I asked where Lise was. They said no one else was with me. I didn't understand. I told them everything. The room, the notebooks, the drawings. They checked. No record of a 6th floor. The blueprints ended at 5. I demanded they check the CCTV. They did. And that's where it gets worse. The footage shows Lise letting me in. We talk at the front door for a moment, then head toward the elevator. We get in. Then static. 47 minutes of nothing. When the footage comes back, I'm standing alone in front of the elevator, disoriented, pressing the button repeatedly. No sign of her. No footage of her ever exiting the building. The last digital trace of her was her phone's camera roll, which was later found underground on level 5, next to a collapsed shelf. The phone had one video on it. One. It's a blurry clip, recorded in near total darkness. Her voice is shaking. "I think I went too far," she says. "This place is old, but not just in years. I don't know if it's a room or a memory someone left behind. I see things, not people, like echoes. I don't think they want me to leave." And then silence. The video ends. The investigation went nowhere. No body, no clear explanation. They ruled her a missing person, case closed within 2 months. But I know what I saw. I know she walked down there with me. And I know I didn't imagine that room or those drawings or the feeling that we weren't alone. I've never gone back. I moved across the city. I stopped volunteering. Some nights I dream I'm back down there, turning corridors that never end, hearing her humming. Sometimes I wake up with dust on my fingers, even though I haven't touched an archive box in years. I tell this story now because I want people to remember her, not as a victim of some bizarre mystery, but as someone who tried to uncover truth in a place built to bury it. Someone who believed in light, even in the darkest rooms. And if someone ever tells you there are only 5 levels beneath the city archives in Tallinn, don't believe them. Story 11. It was the winter of 1987 when I spent 3 weeks in Devonport, New Zealand. I was 25, traveling alone, taking time off from everything. Work, family, expectations. I had no grand plan, just a notebook, a camera, and the intention to live quietly for a while. Devonport isn't exactly the kind of place people associate with horror. It's peaceful, the kind of town where everyone says hello and shopkeepers remember your name. But what happened to me there, what I witnessed, still keeps me awake some nights. I found the inn on my 2nd day. It wasn't listed on any guidebooks, but I'd seen a flyer pinned to a telephone pole that read, "Winter Retreat, Limited Guests, Historic Hillcrest Inn." The name sounded charming enough, and the price was fair. The woman who answered the door introduced herself as Margaret. She must have been in her early 50s, hair pulled back neatly, wearing one of those high-collared blouses that felt more Victorian than modern. She smiled a little too tightly, but I was used to awkward hosts from previous trips. There were 6 guests in total, including me. We'd all arrived within a day of each other. There was an older German couple, a backpacker from Brisbane, a quiet woman who told us her name was Emily, and a corporate-looking guy from Wellington. Dinner was communal. Margaret insisted on it. No one really minded. The meals were basic, but the wine flowed freely, and the conversations turned deep surprisingly quickly. People shared stories from their lives like it was group therapy. That's where I first really noticed Emily. She had this distant way of speaking, like she was always measuring her words before releasing them. She told us she was from Dunedin and was here to escape noise. When pressed, she laughed and said, "The noise in my head, mostly." I found her strange, but not threatening. Maybe lonely. She always wore the same long gray sweater and read a book at the breakfast table, the same one every day. I can't remember the title now, but I do remember she never turned the pages. On the 5th night, Margaret hosted a winter-themed party in the sitting room. Candles, mulled wine, some attempt at carols playing softly on a cassette player. It was harmless enough, until Emily started to seem off. She didn't eat or drink. She just stood by the corner of the fireplace, arms folded, eyes darting around the room like she was watching someone else that none of us could see. At one point, she whispered something to the Wellington guy, and he physically recoiled. I remember thinking he was overreacting. She was odd, yes, but harmless. The next morning, she was gone. At first, we thought she'd just gone into town. But her room was untouched. The bed was still made, her book was still at the table. Her coat and shoes were missing, but her luggage remained. We told Margaret, who looked confused but not particularly alarmed. Perhaps she had a family. Emergency, she said. She mentioned wanting to leave early. But none of us remembered her saying that. I pushed back a little, asked if she'd checked out officially. Margaret just said, "She never paid in advance, and there's nothing of value left in her room." The days that followed were strange. Margaret stopped eating dinner with us. The backpacker left without saying goodbye. The German couple kept to themselves. I tried asking around, but people seemed unwilling to talk about Emily. When I brought her up to the Wellington guy, he acted like he didn't even know who I was talking about. "Emily," he said, brow furrowed. "You mean the housekeeper?" There was no housekeeper. I started to feel like I was losing my mind. I went into town and asked at the small cafe if they'd seen Emily. The woman behind the counter shook her head slowly and said, "That inn? People come and go. Not everyone stays in memory." It felt cryptic. I let it go. A few nights later, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about her. Emily's eyes, how she seemed trapped in her own silence. I walked quietly through the halls, hoping movement would tire me out. That's when I noticed the attic hatch above the hallway near the stairwell. It was slightly ajar. I hadn't noticed it before. I'm not proud of what I did next, but curiosity overrode common sense. I climbed onto a chair and pushed the hatch open. A ladder unfolded down. The air that spilled out was cold and heavy. I told myself I'd just look quickly. The attic was cramped and dusty, mostly old furniture covered with sheets. But in one corner, neatly stacked, were 3 pieces of vintage luggage. One had a tag. It read, "Emily W. Dunedin." I froze. There was no dust on that luggage. Someone had placed it there recently. I crouched down and unzipped one of the bags. Inside were folded sweaters, a photo of a girl I assumed was Emily with another woman, possibly her mother, and a journal. I opened the journal, flipping through quickly. The entries were disturbing. Pages and pages describing feeling watched and dreams of being erased. One page had a single sentence written over and over. "If I vanish, it's not because I left." I don't know how long I stayed there reading. I heard footsteps below and nearly jumped out of my skin. The hatch creaked. Margaret's voice called up, calm but firm. "That area's off limits, dear." Dangerous flooring, I didn't reply. I waited until she walked away. I stuffed the journal into my coat and climbed down quietly. That night, I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, I packed my things and told Margaret I was leaving. She gave me the same polite smile and said, "Of course." Sometimes the air here unsettles people. I took a ferry to Auckland and flew home within 2 days. I never told anyone about Emily for a long time. I felt ashamed, like I'd failed to act. I tried researching her full name, but couldn't find any matching records. The journal became my only proof, though even that felt like it might fall apart in my hands. It was 4 years later, 1991, when I heard about the Hillcrest Inn again. I was reading a small piece in a travel newsletter. It had burned down, electrical fault. No fatalities, but the article mentioned that the attic was full of old, unclaimed luggage. Police suspected that the inn had been reselling guest items for years after covering up unauthorized disappearances. They found Emily's ID in one of the bags. Her full name was Emily Watterson. 29. No mental health history, no criminal record. She'd been reported missing by a sister, but no match had been made at the time because the inn used fake guest records. Apparently, Margaret had been falsifying check-ins for years to avoid tax inspections. Some guests never officially existed, at least not on paper. It didn't make the national news. Just a few local stories and then it vanished. I contacted the Devonport police, sent them a scan of the journal. I never heard back. I still have it. The journal. It's in a box under my bed with a few old photos and some letters I can't throw away. Sometimes I read it, especially the page where she wrote, "If I vanish, it's not because I left." I think about how many people saw her, talked to her, and still let her slip away. I think about Margaret, calm and smiling, pretending like none of it ever happened. I think about the Wellington guy and how he acted like she never existed. Maybe he wasn't pretending. Maybe something about that place really did erase her. Memories, evidence, even people. But not entirely. Not from me. I remember her. I always will. Story 12. It started with a message from Sophia, my friend since college. She'd been traveling across Europe for her blog and had just arrived in Bruges. We hadn't talked in months, but then out of the blue, I got a voice note. Her voice was strained, distracted. She said she'd found an odd Airbnb. Cheap, but with perfect reviews, and she was sure there was a story behind it. Her last words stuck with me. "Katya, something's not right about the mirror here. It shows. Things." That was it. Nothing more, no location, no follow-up. She never posted again. I messaged her for days, then weeks. Her profile stayed active, but no replies. Eventually, her blog's subscribers started posting comments asking where she'd gone. I wasn't the only one worried. I went to Bruges a month later. It wasn't just about finding her. I needed answers. I told myself it was about closure, but I was already too deep before I even stepped off the train. I traced her last posts and managed to narrow down the Airbnb through a geotag she forgot to remove. The listing was no longer public, but with some digging, I found the owner, a man named Joris. I messaged him from a new account, said I was visiting alone and needed a quiet place to work. He responded within the hour. The flat was available. The place didn't look like much when I arrived. Small, modest, nothing alarming. Joris met me at the door. Tall, soft-spoken, probably in his 30s. Nothing about him screamed danger. He handed me the keys, showed me around quickly, and left. The flat had this eerie stillness to it. Not quiet, still, like everything had paused. But I'd stayed in plenty of creepy places while traveling. I pushed it aside. I looked through every drawer, every closet, every corner, half hoping I'd find a clue left behind by Sophia. But there was nothing. No journal, no charger, no strand of hair. It was clean to the point of sterile. Except for the mirror. It hung on the wall opposite the bed. Tall, old, with a tarnished frame. It didn't match the rest of the place. I didn't think much of it at first. That changed at night. I had trouble sleeping. Jet lag or nerves, probably both. I tossed around for hours. Around 3 a.m., I sat up and glanced at the mirror, expecting to see my own exhausted reflection. But the mirror was wrong. I could see myself, but behind me, there was someone else. A woman. She was blurry, like she was underwater. Her face was twisted with grief, hands reaching out like she was trapped behind the glass. I turned around, heart in my throat. Nothing there. I looked back at the mirror. It was just me now, alone. I didn't sleep at all that night. In the morning, I convinced myself it was sleep deprivation, maybe even a waking dream. I left the flat and wandered the city for hours trying to calm myself. I debated leaving. But something about Sophia's message kept me rooted there. I needed to understand what she saw. The next night. I waited until dark. I sat in front of the mirror, phone in hand, recording. Nothing happened for hours. I was about to give up when the surface began to shift, like a shimmer, subtle but unmistakable. Then it showed someone else. It was my father. He died when I was 17. I remember the hospital bed, the tubes, the way his eyes dimmed just before the flatline. But in the mirror, he looked alive. Older, as if he'd aged with me. He was smiling. He raised his hand slowly and touched the inside of the glass. My heart raced. I reached out too, and when my fingers met the surface, it was ice cold. Not the usual chill of glass, but something deeper. Numbing. I jerked back. The image vanished. I left the flat the next day. I told myself I was done. But of course, I wasn't. I contacted someone I met on a forum a while ago, Michael, a tech guy who helped investigate strange events. He was skeptical but curious. I didn't tell him everything, just enough to get him interested. He flew in the next week. We rented the flat again using Michael's info. Joris didn't ask any questions. This time Michael brought equipment, motion sensors, hidden cameras, even a thermal device. We set it all up facing the mirror. I stayed in another hotel and only visited during the day. The first 2 nights, nothing happened. On the third, I got a call from Michael at 2:17 a.m. I missed it. When I called back, no answer. I rushed to the flat. The door was unlocked. The equipment was still there, untouched, but Michael wasn't. I called the police. They searched, questioned me, and left with more confusion than answers. No signs of struggle, no traces of Michael, just gone. The footage from the hidden camera was still running. I watched it over and over, and I wish I never had. At 2:13 a.m., Michael sat in front of the mirror. He looked bored, half asleep. Then he froze. His head tilted slowly to the left, like he heard something. He turned to face the mirror, and his expression changed. Horror. Then awe. He stood, approached the mirror, touched it. A crackle of static burst through the audio, and the video glitched. Then it showed him standing, but his reflection was screaming. Then it wasn't a reflection anymore. The mirror showed him convulsing, blood seeping from his eyes, his mouth open in a silent scream. But in the real room, he stood perfectly still. Then he dropped. The video timestamp continued, but he never moved again, and yet there was no body. I showed it to the police. They dismissed it as a hoax, said he probably left on his own. They didn't even take the footage. I was on my own again. The listing vanished the next day. The flat was emptied when I returned. No mirror. No Joris. The address didn't even show up on Google Maps anymore, like it had been scrubbed. Sophia never resurfaced. Neither did Michael. I went home. I tried to move on. For months, I told myself it was trauma, that my mind twisted what I saw, went to therapy. I journaled. I got better. Then, weeks later, I saw it. In a thrift store window downtown, a mirror. Old, tarnished, tall. The same one. I felt it before I saw it, like a hand tightening around my lungs. I walked in, heart hammering. The clerk didn't know where it came from, said someone dropped it off anonymously. I stood in front of it. My reflection stared back. But it wasn't just me. Sophia stood behind me. No smile, no sound, just wide, tear-filled eyes. Her lips moved like she was trying to speak, but no words came. Then Michael appeared beside her. Then my father. Then people I didn't recognize. Dozens of them, all watching me. I ran. I didn't look back. I came back the next day, ready to destroy it. But the mirror was gone. The clerk didn't know who took it. I didn't sleep that night. I haven't really slept since. I moved cities, deleted all my old accounts, stopped writing. But I still see it, in dreams, in shop windows, sometimes just in the corner of my eye. The mirror isn't just a window, it's a door. And once you've looked through it, something looks back. So if you ever see a listing that's too good to be true with perfect reviews and no recent checkouts, walk away. Don't open the door. Don't look in the mirror. Because if you do, you might see someone you love, and you'll never see yourself again. And that wraps up our journey through 12 Appalachian road trip horror stories. Which one chilled you the most? If you made it all the way, type, "The roads are watching" in the comments, so I know you're one of the fearless travelers. Until next time, drive safe, and remember, some roads were never meant to be traveled.